Some mysteries are never meant to be solved. They don't begin with monsters. They don't begin with ghosts. They begin with ordinary people who experience something impossible. Tonight, you're about to enter a mystery that will make you question memory, reality, and the human mind itself. Welcome to Mind Maze.
At exactly 3:17 a.m., Ethan Carter woke up gasping for air. His bedroom was completely silent. The only sound he could hear was his own heartbeat. His hands were trembling. His breathing was heavy. But it wasn't because of a nightmare. It was because he remembered something impossible. He saw a small wooden cabin hidden deep inside a forest. He had never been there, yet somehow, he knew every room, every broken window, every creaking floorboard. Then another memory flashed before his eyes. A little girl, smiling, holding a bright red balloon. And without thinking, Ethan whispered her name, Emma. His eyes widened. How do I know her? Then another image appeared. An old rusty safe. For numbers. 2, 7, 1, 9. And finally, a giant oak tree. Beneath its roots, a rusted metal key buried in the ground. Ethan slowly sat up in bed. His heart was racing. These weren't dreams. They felt like memories. Memories that belonged to someone else. Ethan took a deep breath. This can't be real, he whispered. He climbed out of bed and slowly walked toward the bathroom. The apartment felt unusually quiet. Every step echoed through the empty hallway. He turned on the bathroom light. The bright white light filled the room. Ethan leaned over the sink and splashed cold water across his face. He looked up at the mirror. For a moment, everything looked normal. Then, the reflection smiled. Ethan did not. His blood ran cold. The smiling reflection slowly tilted its head. But Ethan was standing completely still. He blinked. The reflection instantly returned to normal. What was that? His voice trembled. He touched the mirror with his hand. It was just cold glass. Suddenly, his phone began to vibrate. An unknown number was calling. Ethan hesitated, then answered. Hello. There was only silence. 5 long seconds passed. Then a calm voice whispered, "Those memories were never yours." The call ended immediately. Ethan looked at his phone. The number had disappeared. There was no missed call, no call history, as if the phone had never rung at all. Ethan couldn't ignore it anymore. The cabin, the little girl, the strange reflection, and that mysterious phone call, none of it felt like a coincidence. He walked into the living room and opened his laptop. Taking a deep breath, he typed the only clue he had. Blackwood Forest cabin. Hundreds of search results appeared. Travel blogs, camping websites, old maps. Nothing looked familiar. Frustrated, Ethan was about to close the browser. Then, one old newspaper article caught his attention. The headline read, "Family vanishes without a trace near Blackwood Forest." His heart skipped a beat. He clicked on the article. An old photograph slowly appeared on the screen. Ethan froze. It was the cabin. The same broken windows, the same wooden porch, the same old chimney. Every detail was exactly as he had seen it. Then his eyes moved to the family photograph below. A man, a woman, and a little girl, holding a bright red balloon. Ethan whispered, "Emma." But this time, he wasn't guessing. He already knew her name. Ethan read the article again. This time, more carefully. Every sentence felt strangely familiar. Then something caught his attention. At the bottom of the page, a handwritten note had been scanned into the article. It read, "Cabin 17, Blackwood Forest Road." Ethan's eyes widened. The address echoed inside his mind. Somehow, he already knew where it was. Before he could think twice, his hands reached for his car keys. "I need answers," he whispered. 30 minutes later, Ethan was driving alone through a narrow mountain road. Thick fog covered the forest. There were no streetlights, no other cars, only endless trees stretching into the darkness. The GPS suddenly lost its signal. The screen turned black. A cold chill ran down Ethan's spine. But he didn't stop. It was as if something was pulling him toward the cabin. The forest grew darker with every mile. Ethan tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Finally, he saw it. The cabin. It stood exactly where his memories had placed it. Old, silent, forgotten. He stepped out of the car. The cold air sent a shiver down his spine. Dead leaves crunched beneath his feet as he slowly walked toward the porch. His heart pounded faster with every step. Then, he noticed something strange. The front door was already open. Slowly, creaked back and forth in the wind. Ethan stopped. He looked around. There was no one. No voices. No lights. Just silence. Hello. His voice disappeared into the empty forest. No answer. He took one deep breath and stepped inside. The wooden floor creaked beneath his feet. Dust floated through the air. The smell of old wood filled the cabin. Then, Ethan froze. On a small table near the fireplace lay an old family photograph. It was the same family from the newspaper, but something was different. The father was staring directly at the camera, and in his hand, he was holding the very same rusted key Ethan had seen in his memories. Ethan's hands trembled as he picked up the old photograph. Dust covered its edges. The paper felt old, fragile. He turned it over. His breathing stopped. Written in faded black ink were just 7 words. If you're reading this, you're already too late. Ethan's heart began to race. Beneath the message, another line had been added. It looked newer. The handwriting was different. It said, "Ethan, don't go downstairs." His face turned pale. He had never been here before. So, who knew his name? Suddenly, bang! The cabin door slammed shut. Ethan jumped. He rushed to the entrance. He pulled the handle with all his strength. It wouldn't move. The door was locked. Panic filled the room. Then, from somewhere beneath the wooden floor, he heard it. Knock, knock, knock. 3 slow knocks, coming from below his feet. Ethan stood frozen. Someone, or something, was underneath the cabin. Ethan remained perfectly still. The knocking stopped. Silence filled the cabin once again. Slowly, he looked down at the old wooden floor. Then he noticed something unusual. An old rug, slightly pulled to one side, as if someone had moved it recently. Ethan carefully walked toward it. Every step made the floor creak beneath his feet. His hands shook as he grabbed the edge of the rug. He pulled it back. Underneath was a heavy wooden trapdoor, covered in dust. Except the metal handle. It was perfectly clean. Someone had touched it. Recently. Ethan swallowed hard. Every instinct told him to leave. But the questions inside his mind were louder than his fear. He wrapped his fingers around the cold metal handle. Slowly, he lifted the trapdoor. A wave of freezing air rushed out from the darkness below. He couldn't see the bottom. Only endless still. The knocking stopped. Silence filled the cabin once again. Slowly, he looked down at the old wooden floor. Then he noticed something unusual. An old rug, slightly pulled to one side, as if someone had moved it recently. Ethan carefully walked toward it. Every step made the floor creak beneath his feet. His hands shook as he grabbed the edge of the rug. He pulled it back. Underneath was a heavy wooden trapdoor, covered in dust. Except the metal handle. It was perfectly clean. Someone had touched it. Recently. Ethan swallowed hard. Every instinct told him to leave. But the questions inside his mind were louder than his fear. He wrapped his fingers around the cold metal handle. Slowly, he lifted the trapdoor. A wave of freezing air rushed out from the darkness below. He couldn't see the bottom. Only endless blackness. Then, a whisper floated up from beneath the cabin. Soft, barely audible, yet impossible to mistake. Ethan. His heart nearly stopped. Whoever or whatever was down there already knew his name. Ethan couldn't ignore it anymore. The cabin, the little girl, the strange reflection, and that mysterious phone call. None of it felt like a coincidence. He walked into the living room and opened his laptop. Taking a deep breath, he typed the only clue he had. Blackwood Forest cabin. Hundreds of search results appeared. Travel blogs, camping websites, old maps. Nothing looked familiar. Frustrated, Ethan was about to close the browser. Then, one old newspaper article caught his attention. The headline read, "Family vanishes without a trace near Blackwood Forest." His heart skipped a beat. He clicked on the article. An old photograph slowly appeared on the screen. Ethan froze. It was the cabin. The same broken windows, the same wooden porch, the same old chimney. Every detail was exactly as he had seen it. Then his eyes moved to the family photograph below. A man, a woman, and a little girl, holding a bright red balloon. Ethan whispered, "Emma." But this time, he wasn't guessing. He already knew her name. Ethan slowly stepped closer to the wall. His flashlight moved from one photograph to the next. Every picture had been carefully pinned in perfect rows. Then, he noticed an empty space. A single photograph was missing. Only the rusty pin remained. Ethan frowned. The outline of the missing photo was still visible against the dusty wall. Someone had removed it, very recently. He reached out and touched the empty space. His fingers brushed against the cold wall. Suddenly, he heard it. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, coming from behind him. Step, step, step. Ethan's breathing became shallow. He didn't dare turn around. The footsteps stopped, just a few feet away. The room fell silent. Then a calm voice broke the silence. "You're looking for the wrong answers, Ethan." Ethan spun around. His flashlight swept across the room. Empty. No one was there. Then the light landed on the old wooden desk. Something hadn't been there before. A single photograph, placed neatly in the center. With shaking hands, Ethan picked it up. His face turned pale. The photograph showed him standing inside this very underground room, smiling. But Ethan had never been there before. At least, that's what he wanted to believe. Ethan stared at the photograph in disbelief. His mind raced with questions. Before he could think, a sharp click echoed through the room. He quickly turned toward the sound. On the old wooden desk, a dusty tape recorder had switched on by itself. The reels slowly began to spin. Static filled the silence. Then, a familiar voice spoke. Ethan froze. It was his own voice, calm, but filled with fear. "If you're hearing this, don't trust your memories." Ethan took a slow step closer. His hands were shaking. The recording continued. "Everything you've seen was meant to bring you here." Ethan whispered, "No." The voice on the tape spoke again. "Don't look behind you." Ethan's eyes widened. His breathing stopped. Every instinct told him not to move. But slowly, against his better judgment, he turned around. The room was empty. Then, the tape recorder played one final sentence. "You're already too late." At that exact moment, every photograph on the wall fell to the floor, one after another. The room shook violently, and somewhere in the darkness, someone laughed. The laughter suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. Ethan slowly raised his flashlight. The beam trembled across the room. The photographs, the tape recorder, everything was still. Then, he noticed a narrow doorway hidden behind a fallen bookshelf. It hadn't been there before. Taking a deep breath, Ethan stepped inside. The room was small, barely large enough for one person. In the center, stood an old wooden chair. Resting on the chair was a dusty leather journal. On the cover, one name was carved into the worn leather. Ethan Carter. His hands began to shake. He slowly opened the journal. The first page read, "If you've reached this room, you've followed the same path I did." Ethan frowned. He turned the page. Every page described his life. His first day of school. His first job. The day his father died. Even the nightmare he had the night before. Every detail, every memory, written years before they had happened. Then he reached the final page. Only one sentence was written. "Turn around." Ethan's heartbeat exploded in his chest. Slowly, he turned around. The chair behind him was no longer empty. Someone was sitting there, hidden in the shadows. watching him. Ethan couldn't move. The shadow sat perfectly still. His face remained hidden in the darkness. Only its voice broke the silence. Familiar. Almost identical to Ethan's own. It took you longer this time. Ethan's eyes filled with confusion. Who are you? The figure slowly stood up. One step, then another. As it entered the light, Ethan's breathing stopped. Standing before him was himself. The same face, the same blue eyes, the same scar that Ethan had seen earlier in the bathroom mirror. But this version looked older, tired, broken. Ethan stumbled backward. This isn't possible. The older Ethan gave a faint smile. I said the exact same words when I first met you. Ethan's mind went blank. What do you mean, first met me? The older Ethan looked toward the journal. This cabin doesn't steal memories. It repeats lives. Ethan stared at him in silence. The older Ethan continued. I've lived this night more times than I can remember. Every time I try to escape, I become the man waiting inside this cabin. Ethan slowly shook his head. No. You're lying. The older Ethan sighed. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a rusted metal key. The same key Ethan had seen in his memories. He gently placed it in Ethan's hand. Now it's your turn to choose. Ethan stared at the rusted key resting in his trembling hand. Felt cold, heavier than it should have been. He looked back at the older Ethan. What does this key open? The older Ethan remained silent for a moment. Then he slowly pointed toward the far corner of the room. Hidden in the shadows, Ethan noticed an old steel door. He was certain it hadn't been there before. There were no windows. No handle. Only a single rusted keyhole. The older Ethan spoke softly. Everything you've been searching for is waiting behind that door. Ethan took a careful step forward. His heartbeat echoed in his ears. Every instinct warned him to stop. But the questions, the memories, the whispers, they had all led him here. He stood in front of the steel door. Slowly, he raised the key. His hand shook as he pushed it into the keyhole. Click. The lock turned by itself. Before Ethan could open the door, the older Ethan grabbed his wrist. His voice was filled with desperation. If you open it, you'll never leave this place. Ethan looked into his older self's eyes. For the first time, he saw fear. Real fear. Ethan slowly pulled his hand free. He looked at the older version of himself one last time. Then, he pushed the steel door open. It moved with a long, painful creak. Beyond the doorway, there was no room, no basement, no darkness. Instead, there was another cabin. Exactly the same. The same wooden walls, the same fireplace, the same old table, even the same family photograph. Ethan stepped inside. His breathing became heavier. Everything was identical. Then, he heard footsteps upstairs. Someone was walking across the bedroom floor. Slowly, carefully, as if they had just woken up. Ethan climbed the stairs. Every step made his heart beat faster. He reached the bedroom door. It was slightly open. He looked through the gap. A man was sitting on the edge of the bed. Sweat covered his face. The digital clock beside him read 3:17 a.m. The man slowly looked up. Ethan's eyes widened. It was himself. The same clothes, the same face, the same terrified expression. The nightmare had just begun again. Ethan stood frozen. He watched himself, sitting on the edge of the bed, breathing heavily, completely unaware that someone was watching him. Suddenly, the older Ethan's words echoed inside his mind. This cabin doesn't steal memories. It repeats lives. At that moment, Ethan finally understood. The memories had never belonged to a stranger. They were his own, from a life he hadn't lived yet. Every nightmare, every whisper, every clue, had been left behind by a previous version of himself. Ethan looked back toward the steel door. It was gone. There was no way back. He rushed downstairs. The front door wouldn't open. The windows had disappeared. The cabin had become a prison. Hours passed, then days, then time stopped meaning anything. Ethan sat down in the old wooden chair. the same chair where the shadow had once waited. His beard slowly grew longer. A thin scar appeared above his left eyebrow. He looked exactly like the older Ethan he had met. Then, he heard it. Car engine outside. Footsteps on the porch. The front door slowly opened. A frightened man stepped inside. He looked around the cabin, confused, terrified. Ethan remained hidden in the shadows. He already knew what the stranger would find, because he had lived this moment before. The man took another step. Ethan whispered from the darkness, "It took you longer this time." The cycle had begun again. Some mysteries don't have endings. They only have new beginnings. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe to Mind Maze, because the next mystery is already waiting for you.